A child was found inside a cardboard box. No name, no missing report, no one looking for him. Police searched the entire country for answers, but the deeper they dug, the more disturbing the truth became. Because this wasn't just a murder, it was a child the world allowed to disappear. And by the end of this story, you'll realize the most terrifying part isn't who killed him. It's how many people knew and stayed silent. The morning was colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles deep into the bones. A thin layer of frost clung to the dead leaves scattered across the ground, crunching softly with every step. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind, only the distant hum of a city waking up far away. A man walked slowly along a narrow path with his dog, following the same route he had taken dozens of times before. It was his routine. A short walk before work. A few minutes of silence before the noise of the day began. The dog suddenly stopped. Its ears lifted. Its body stiffened. Then it pulled toward a cluster of bushes just off the trail. "Come on," the man said softly, tugging the leash. But the dog wouldn't move. It sniffed the air, then barked once sharp and uneasy. That's when the man saw it. A cardboard box sat partially hidden beneath branches and leaves. It was worn and damp, its edges soft from exposure to rain and snow. One side had collapsed inward, as if it had been handled too many times. At first, he assumed it was trash. Old furniture, broken appliances. People dumped things there often enough. Still, something felt wrong. He stepped closer. The box wasn't sealed. The top flaps were folded inward almost gently. The man hesitated, his heart beating faster than it should have for such a small moment. Then he looked inside. He staggered back. Inside the box was a child. The boy was small, curled slightly on his side, as if trying to stay warm. His skin was pale, almost gray. His hair was light, unevenly cut, as though scissors had slipped again and again. There were bruises visible even at a glance, dark against fragile skin. The man felt the world tilt. He fumbled for his phone with shaking hands and dialed the police. His voice cracked as he tried to explain what he had found. The operator told him to stay where he was, to not touch anything. Within minutes, the woods filled with flashing red and blue lights. Police cars blocked off the road. Officers moved carefully through the trees, their faces tight and serious. The box was photographed from every angle. The ground around it was searched inch by inch. Officers looked for footprints, broken branches, cigarette butts, anything that might explain how a child ended up there. There was almost nothing. No clear tracks, no tire marks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the box had simply appeared overnight. The boy was carefully removed and placed into a white sheet. Even in death, he seemed impossibly light. One officer later said it felt like lifting a bundle of clothes. As the body was taken away, a strange detail caught the attention of one detective. The child was clean. His fingernails were trimmed. His skin showed no dirt or mud. There were no leaves tangled in his hair. Whoever placed him in that box had taken time they didn't need to take. That detail stayed with the detective long after the scene was cleared. By afternoon, the story reached the news. "Boy found dead in box," the headlines read. Helicopters hovered above the trees. Reporters spoke in hushed tones. The public reacted with shock, then anger, then grief. Who was he? Why hadn't anyone reported him missing? Police released a basic description: a young white male, approximately 6 years old, underweight, with signs of abuse. They hoped the details would spark recognition. They waited for calls to come in. They waited for parents, teachers, neighbors, anyone. But the phones stayed quiet. As night fell, the woods returned to silence. The box was gone. The police tape was removed. But something had changed. A child had been found, and no one had come looking for him. That was the moment investigators realized this was not just a murder. It was a disappearance no one noticed. And that realization made the case far more disturbing than anyone was prepared for. The autopsy room was quiet, broken only by the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The boy lay on a metal table covered with a white sheet. To the people in the room, He was no longer a child. He was evidence. The medical examiner worked slowly and carefully. Every mark mattered. Every detail told a story the boy could not tell himself. The results were troubling. The child was severely underweight for his age. His ribs were clearly defined. His stomach was sunken. This was not the body of a child who missed a few meals. This was long-term hunger. Old scars covered his back, arms, and legs. Some were thin and faded. Others were deeper, poorly healed. They came from different times, spread across months, maybe even years. This child had been hurt again and again. The official cause of death was ruled homicide. The injuries suggested abuse, not an accident. Someone had failed this boy long before the night he died. Detectives gathered around a table later that evening, staring at photographs and reports. No one spoke for a long moment. "How does a kid live like this?" one officer finally said, "and nobody notices?" That question would follow the case forever. Police quickly realized they had another problem. The boy had no name. His fingerprints were taken, but they led nowhere. He was not in any database. Dental records showed no match. Hospitals had no files that fit him. Schools had no missing students. It was as if the boy had never officially existed. The media stepped in where records failed. Newspapers printed sketches of the child's face. Television stations showed recreations of what he might have looked like, alive, smiling, healthy, normal. The public was asked to look closely. "Do you recognize this child?" People called in with tips. Hundreds of them. Some swore the boy looked like a neighbor's son. Others thought he resembled a child who once lived down the street years ago. Detectives chased every lead. Each one collapsed. One detail began to trouble investigators deeply. The boy's hair had been cut shortly before his death, not by a professional. The lines were uneven. Some strands were too short, others missed completely. Someone had done it in a rush. Why cut a child's hair if you plan to kill him? Another detail was just as disturbing. The boy's body was clean. No dirt under his nails. No blood on his skin. He had been washed. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. It suggested something far more unsettling than a moment of violence. It suggested guilt. Or care. Or both. Detectives began to believe the killer knew the boy well. Very well. Someone who lived with him. Someone who saw him every day. Someone who knew his routines, his fears, his silence. Investigators visited neighborhoods near the woods. They knocked on doors. They spoke to parents, teachers, shop owners. They asked the same questions again and again. "Have you seen a child disappear recently?" Most people said no. Some looked uncomfortable. A few shut their doors without answering. Social workers were brought in. They searched welfare records, foster care lists, adoption agencies. One file stood out a report of a child removed from an abusive home years earlier, but the age didn't match. Another dead end. As weeks passed, frustration grew. The boy became known nationwide as the boy in the box. It was a name that felt wrong, but it was all anyone had. Flowers began appearing near the woods. Stuffed animals. Candles. Strangers mourned him more than anyone had in life. Inside the police department, morale sank. Officers worked late into the night, replaying the same questions. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why didn't anyone look for him? One detective began to fear the answer. "What if," he said quietly, "nobody ever wanted him?" The room went silent. Because if that was true, then the case might never be solved. A child could be abused, hidden, and killed, and the world would only notice when it was already too late. By the end of the second month, investigators had to admit what no one wanted to say out loud. They were hunting a killer. But first, they had to find a name. And without it, the case was slowly slipping into darkness. The rain had been falling all evening when the woman walked into the police station. Her coat was too thin for the weather, soaked through at the shoulders. Strands of wet hair clung to her face. She stood just inside the doorway for several seconds, as if unsure whether to step forward or turn back. The desk officer looked up and asked if he could help her. "I need to talk to someone," she said. Her voice was low, uneven. "About the boy in the box." The room went quiet. She was taken to a small interview room at the back of the station. A paper cup of coffee sat untouched in front of her. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around it, not to drink, but to steady herself. Detectives introduced themselves and turned on the recorder. She took a deep breath. "I've been having nightmares," she began. "I see the box. I hear him crying." She said she had been a teenager when it happened, living with her mother in a small house far from the city. Her mother, she explained, was cruel, unstable, and obsessed with control. One night, her mother came home with a boy. Not a baby, not a toddler, a boy who looked about 5 or 6. The woman claimed her mother had bought him from a couple who couldn't afford to keep him. No paperwork, no records. Cash exchanged in silence. From that moment on, the boy was hidden. He wasn't allowed outside. He wasn't enrolled in school. Neighbors were told he was a visiting relative who didn't like people. Most days, the woman said, the boy stayed locked in the basement. She described the space in detail. Bare walls. A single light bulb. A thin mattress on the floor. No toys. No windows. The boy was punished for everything making noise, spilling food, crying, sometimes for nothing at all. As she spoke, detectives noticed how precise her memory was. She remembered smells, sounds, exact phrases her mother used. She cried when she talked about the beatings, about the hunger. Then she reached the part of the story that made the room go still. One night, she said, the boy was allowed upstairs to take a bath. He was weak, thin, afraid. As he walked down the stairs afterward, he slipped. His head struck the concrete floor. He didn't move. Her mother waited, shook him, screamed his name, though the woman said she never knew what that name was. When it became clear the boy wasn't breathing, panic took over. Her mother cleaned the body, cut his hair, trimmed his nails. Then she placed him inside a cardboard box. They drove for hours in the dark. No radio, no talking. The woman said she watched her mother carry the box into the woods and set it down carefully, almost gently. "I was too scared to stop her," the woman whispered. "I was just a kid." When the recording stopped, the detectives sat in silence. Her story matched details the public didn't know. The cleaned body, the haircut, the lack of records. It felt real. Too real. Investigators immediately reopened old files. They searched for the house she described. They tracked down former neighbors. But cracks began to appear. The medical examiner reviewed the autopsy again. The injuries didn't fully match a fall. Some damage was older, repeated. The timeline was off. When detectives visited the property the woman claimed was her childhood home, it had been renovated years ago. The basement showed no signs of long-term confinement. No stains. No damage. Neighbors remembered the woman and her mother, but none recalled a child living there. Not even secretly. The woman was brought back in for more questioning. This time, her story shifted slightly. Small changes, different dates, different distances. She insisted she was telling the truth, but truth needs proof. Without physical evidence, prosecutors refused to move forward. The case stalled once again. The woman was never charged. She was never officially named a suspect. But her story was leaked. The public reacted strongly. Some believed her completely. Others accused her of lying for attention. She disappeared from the media soon after. Years later, detectives would still argue about her. Some believed she was haunted by guilt, and telling the truth she never had the courage to speak. Others believed she had inserted herself into the case, shaping a story from details she had learned over time. But one thing was certain. For the first time, investigators had faced a terrifying possibility. The boy had not been lost. He had been hidden. And whoever hid him had done it so well that even the truth struggled to escape. The case file was thick with age. Pages yellowed, corners bent, notes written in different handwriting across decades. Most detectives avoided it. Cold cases had a way of draining hope. But not everyone. The investigator who reopened the boy in the box case was younger than most of the file itself. He had grown up hearing about the mystery, about the nameless child no one could identify. To him, it wasn't just a story. It was unfinished business. He started where others had ended. Instead of focusing on suspects, He focused on systems, schools, hospitals, social services. He believed the boy didn't disappear because no one saw him. He disappeared because paperwork failed him. Late one night, while reviewing archived documents from a closed children's clinic, he noticed something strange: a medical intake form. The child's age, height, weight, and scars matched almost perfectly. The notes described frequent injuries and signs of neglect. The handwriting was rushed, nervous. But the name section was blacked out, not erased, covered. The investigator felt a chill. Why hide a name unless someone wanted it forgotten? He traced the clinic's history. It had shut down suddenly, years before the boy was found. The director had lost her license over administrative violations. Nothing criminal, at least officially. Digging deeper, he found something worse. Several children treated at the clinic had vanished from the system shortly after being discharged. No follow-ups, no transfers, no death records. They simply disappeared. Adoption agencies became the next focus. Back then, records were loose, oversight weak. Some families wanted children without questions. Some agencies were willing to help. One adoption file stood out. A boy. Age approximately 5. Name listed, then crossed out. Status: private placement. The address linked to the placement was only 10 miles from where the box had been found. Police obtained permission to search the old house. It was empty. Dust covered the floors. The walls had been repainted, but something about the place felt wrong. Too quiet, too closed off. In the attic, behind old insulation, they found it. A small mattress. Thin. Stained. The kind sold cheaply, meant for temporary use. Next to it was a plastic bowl, cracked along the side. This wasn't the guest bed. This was where a child had been kept. Then came the drawings, faded crayon lines on scraps of paper, taped to a wooden beam. They were simple, childlike, stick figures, a house, a dark square, and over again, a box. One drawing showed a small figure inside it. No words, just shapes. The investigator stood there for a long time, unable to speak. For a moment, it felt like the boy was reaching out across time, leaving proof that he had lived, that he had been there. But the hope didn't last. The family who once owned the house had moved away years earlier. 2 were dead. 1 was missing. Another refused to speak, citing poor health and faded memory. Without a confession, without DNA, without a name, the evidence wasn't enough. Again. Still, the discovery changed the case. It confirmed what many had feared. The boy had been hidden within the system, passed quietly from place to place, never fully recorded. He wasn't invisible by accident. He was erased. The investigator prepared a report recommending the case be reclassified, not as an isolated murder, but as a failure of child protection, adoption oversight, and medical accountability. The report was filed, then buried. Funding ran out. Priorities shifted. New cases demanded attention. The boy in the box returned to silence, but something had changed forever. For the first time, there was proof the boy had been seen by doctors, by caregivers, by adults who should have protected him. They wrote notes. They filed forms. Then they looked away. The investigator left the department years later, but he kept copies of the drawings. He said they reminded him why he started the job in the first place. Because somewhere between those faded lines was a child asking a simple question: "Did anyone see me?" And the most haunting answer was this: yes, they did. And they let him disappear anyway. The cemetery was quiet, even on busy days. Cars passed nearby, people talked in low voices, but around one small grave, there was always a strange stillness. The headstone was simple. No last name. No dates that meant anything to anyone. Just a few words. America's unknown child. No one knew who chose them. The boy had been buried with care. Strangers attended the funeral: police officers, reporters, local residents who had never met him but felt they somehow owed him something. Some cried. Others stood in silence, staring at the small casket as it was lowered into the ground. He had been alone in life. No one would let him be alone in death. Years passed. People kept coming. Stuffed animals appeared at the grave. Small cars, teddy bears, notes written in careful handwriting. Some were from parents, some from children who had learned his story in school. One note read, "I hope you are warm now." Another said, "If you were my brother, I would have protected you." The case officially remained unsolved. Police files were closed, then reopened, then closed again. New technology brought new hope: DNA testing, facial reconstruction, advanced databases. Each time, investigators believed they were close. Each time, the answer slipped away. A partial DNA profile was developed, but it led nowhere. No matches. No relatives stepping forward. No sudden breakthrough. The boy stayed nameless, but rumors never stopped. Some said the woman from years earlier had told the truth and lived the rest of her life in quiet regret. Others believed the truth died with a family that knew exactly what they had done and took it to the grave. There were whispers about illegal adoptions, about doctors who signed papers they shouldn't have, about social workers who ignored warning signs because it was easier than fighting the system. None of it could be proven, and maybe that was the hardest part, because the mystery was no longer just about a killer, it was about silence. At some point, someone had known the boy's name. Someone had fed him, punished him, spoken to him. Someone had looked into his eyes and seen fear, and still they chose to say nothing. As the decades passed, the boy in the box became more than a case. He became a symbol, a reminder of what happens when children fall through the cracks, when abuse hides behind closed doors and paperwork replaces responsibility. True crime documentaries told his story again and again. Each retelling asked the same questions, hoping repetition might force the truth into the light. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why did no one save him? But there was one question that was rarely asked out loud. What if the truth was already known and deliberately ignored? Because solving the case might mean admitting failure, not of one person, but of an entire system. And that kind of truth is harder to face than an unsolved mystery. Today, people still visit the grave. They still bring toys. They still whisper apologies to a child who can no longer hear them. Some believe one day his name will be discovered, that a record will surface, that a distant relative will come forward, that science will finally succeed where humans failed. Others believe the truth is already gone forever. But even if his name is never known, one thing is certain: the boy in the box existed. He felt fear. He felt pain. And for a brief moment in history, the world noticed him. Maybe that is why his story refuses to fade. Because as long as people remember him, he is no longer just evidence in a file. He is a warning, a reminder that evil does not always hide in dark alleys or remote woods. Sometimes it hides in ordinary homes, behind quiet doors, protected by silence. And sometimes the most frightening part of a mystery is not what we don't know, but what we choose not to see. The boy in the box never got a name, never got a birthday, never got the chance to be missed, but his story survived. Not because the mystery was solved, but because the silence around it was too loud to ignore. Somewhere in the past, someone knew who he was. They knew his voice, his fear, his suffering, and they chose to look away. And that is what makes this case unforgettable. Because the real question was never just who killed him. It's how a child could live in pain and disappear while the world stayed quiet. As long as his story is told, he is no longer invisible. And maybe remembering him is the closest thing to justice he will ever receive.